Welcome to another reading. I am the Jedi historian, and I'm here to bring you this. Next month, in April, Republic Commandos is dropping for PlayStation 4 and Nintendo Switch. So I thought, for my first book I want to read, it's going to be the Republic Commando. This is an old one I've had for a while, and I finished it a long time ago in a house far, far away. So old that I use this as a bookmark. That's how old it is. It's early 2000s. But basically, with this can't decide. This video series I want to read just like the prologue and the first chapter, and if there's any traction on that book, if people want more of it, I don't mind reading more of it. But to begin, let's take a look at Republic Commando Hard Contact. Written by Karen Travis. A little bit about the author, I think. A former defense correspondent and TV and newspaper journalist, Karen Travis has also worked as a police press officer, an advertising copywriter, and a journalism lecturer. She has served in both the Royal Navy Auxiliary Service and Territorial Army since her graduation from the Claren East class of 2000. Her short stories have appeared in Asimov's Realms of Fantasy and On Spec. Her first novel, City of Pearl, was published in 2004 to critical acclaim. Her second novel is Crossing the Line. Just a little bit about the author. To give you a bit of a synopsis, on the back of the book, it's Star Wars, Republic Commando. As the Clone Wars rages, victory or defeat lies in the hands of elite squads that take on the toughest assignments in the galaxy. Stone-cold soldiers who go where no one else would go, to do what no one else could. On a mission to sabotage a nanovirus research facility on a separatist-held planet, 4 clone troopers operate under the very nose of their enemies. The commandos are outnumbered and outgunned, deep behind enemy lines with no backup, and working with strangers instead of trusted teammates. Matters don't improve when Darman, the squad's demolition expert, gets cut off from the others during planetfall. Even Darman's apparent good luck in meeting a Jedi Padawan vanishes once she admits to her woeful inexperience. For the isolated clone commandos and stranded Jedi, a long, dangerous journey lies ahead, through hostile territory brimming with Trandoshan slavers, separatists, and suspicious natives. A single misstep could mean discovery and death. It's a vital suicide mission for anyone except the Republic Commandos. Okay. So let's begin. Okay. It literally begins. Okay. Prologue. Okay. This is how it happened. It's pitch black below. Let me try that again. Okay. This is how it happened. It's pitch black below, and we're fast roping into the crevasse. Too fast. I can feel the impact in my back teeth when I land. I'm first down, and I flood the chamber with my helmet's spot lamp. There's a triple-sealed blast door between us and the Geonosians, and I haven't got time to calculate the charge needed to blow it. A lot, then. P for plenty, like I was taught. Stick the thermal tape around the edge and push in the detonator. Easier said than done. The alloyed door's covered with crud. Delta Squad CO gets on the helmet comm. You having a party down there, Theta? Can't rush an artist. You want to tell that to the spider droids. Patience, Delta. Come on. Stick to the metal, will you? Nearly there. A lot of spider droids. I hear you, Delta. In your own time. No pressure. Not at all. Clear. We flatten ourselves against the cavern walls. It's all white light and painful noise and flying dust for a fraction of a second. When we can see again, the doors are blown inward, ripped apart, billowing smoke. Delta Squad, clear to enter. Take. I thought you'd never ask. Delta Squad hits the ground and they're straight in, firing, while we stand back and cover. There's 6. It's a warren of tunnels down here. If we're not careful, something could jump us from any direction. My helmet's supposed to protect against high decibels, but war is noisy, really noisy. I can't hear my helmet comm link through the oomph of the Geonosian sonic rounds and our own blaster fire. I can hear anti-armor going off, too. Fair effect. I can feel it through my boots. Movement catches my eye up ahead, and then it's gone. I'm looking up through the DC-17 scopes, checking that it was just my imagination. And Toller gestures toward another of the 5 tunnels facing us. Darman, take the E-web and hold this position. He beckons Vin and Jay, and they move almost back to back towards the mouth of the tunnel, checking to all sides. And then I look up overhead. There's more Geonosians around than we thought. A lot more. I take down 2 above me, and then more come out of the tunnel to the left, so I open fire with the repeating blaster. Nice and early. Because if I let them get too close, the blast will fry me as well. Even so, it's knocking me back like a trip hammer. Toller! Darman here. Over. I can't see him. I can't see any of them, but I can hear rapid fire. Toller! Darman here. You receiving me? Over. Not so much silence as an absence of a familiar voice. Then a few fragments, crackling shouts of down! Man down here! Who's down? Toller, Vin, Jay, you receiving? Over. I've lost contact with my squad. It's the last time I see them. Chapter 1. Scramble line encrypted. Stand by. Geonosis forward control to fleet support. Ord Mantell. Prepare to receive. Case vac transport. Med triage team estimates serious injuries. 12,000. Repeat, 12,000. Walking wounded, 8,000. Repeat, 8,000. ETA, 10 hours. Logistics, priority for back-to-tank support teams. Prep for 72,000 combat fit troops. Repeat, 72,000 pending redeployment. Priority weapons support for commando units. That is all. Out. Republic assault ship Implacable. Inbound for extraction from Geonosis. Stand by. Republic Commando 1136 studied every face in line waiting to board the gunships. Some were helmeted, some were not. But one way or another, they all had his face. Excuse me. And they were all strangers. "Move it!" the loadmaster shouted, gesturing side to side with one outstretched arm. "Come on! Shift it, people! Fast as you can!" The gunships dropped down in clouds of dust, and troopers embarked, some turning to pull comrades inboard so that the ship could lift again quickly. There was no reason to scramble for it. They'd done it 1,000 times in training. Extraction from a real battle was what they prepared for. This wasn't a retreat. They'd grabbed their first victory. The gunship's downdraft kicked the red Geonosian soil into the air. RC-1136 Darman took off his helmet and ran his gauntlet carefully across the pale gray dome, wiping away the dust and noting a few scrapes and burn marks. The loadmaster turned to him. He was one of the very, very few outsiders whom Darman had ever seen working with the Grand Army. A short, wrinkled Duros with a temper to match. "Are you embarking or what?" Darman continued, wiping his helmet. "I'm waiting for my mate." Sorry. Darman continued, wiping his helmet. "I'm waiting for my mates," he said. "You shift your shiny silver backside now," the loadmaster said irritably. "I got a schedule." Darman carefully brought up his knuckle plate, just under the loadmaster's chin, and held it there. He didn't need to eject the vibroblade. He didn't need to say a word. He made his point. "Well, whenever you're ready, sir," the Duros said, stepping back to chivvy clone troopers instead. It wasn't a great idea to upset a commando, especially not one coming down from the adrenaline high of combat. But there's still no sign of the rest of the squad. Darman knew that there was no point in waiting any longer. They hadn't called in. Maybe they had comlink failures. Maybe they had made it onto another gunship. It was the first time in his artificial short life that Darman hadn't been able to reach out and touch the men he had been raised with. He waited half a standard hour more, anyway, until the gunships became less frequent and the lines of troopers became shorter. Eventually, there was nobody standing on the desert plain but him, the Duros loadmaster, and half a dozen clone troopers. It was the last lift of the day. "You better come now, sir," the loadmaster said. "There's nobody unaccounted for. Nobody alive, anyway." Darman looked around the horizon one last time, still feeling as if he were turning his back on someone reaching out to him. "I'm coming," he said, and brought up the rear of the line as the gunship lifted. He watched the swirling dust, dwindling rock formations, and scattered shrinking patches of scrub until Geonosis became a blur of dull red. He could still search the Implacable. It wasn't over yet. The gunship slipped into the Implacable's giant docking bay, and Darman looked down into the cavern onto a sea of white armor and orderly movement. The first thing that struck him when the gunship killed its thrusters and locked down on its pad was how quiet everyone seemed. In the crowded bay full of troopers, the air stank of sweat and stale fear and the throat-rasping smell of discharged blaster rifles. But it was so silent that if Darman hadn't seen the evidence of exhausted and injured men, he would have believed that nothing significant happened in the last 30 hours. The deck vibrated under the soles of his boots. He was still staring down at them, studying the random patterns of Geonosian dust that clung to them, when an identical pair came into view. "Number!" said a voice that was also his own. The commander swept him with a tally sensor. He didn't need Darman to tell him his number, or anything else for that matter, because the sensor in the enhanced Katarn armor reported his status silently, electronically. No significant injury. The triage team on Geonosis had waved him past, concentrating on the injured, ignoring both those too badly hurt to help and those who could help themselves. Are you listening to me? Come on, talk to me, son. I'm okay, sir, he said. Sir, RC1136. I'm not in shock. I'm fine. He paused. Nobody else was going to call him by his squad nickname, Darman, again. They were all dead. He knew it. Jay, Vin, Tala. He just knew. Sir, any news of RC1135? No, said the commander, who had obviously heard similar questions every time he stopped to check. He gestured with the small bar in his hand. If they're not in casevac or listed on the sweep, they didn't make it. It was stupid to ask. Darman should have known better. Clone troopers, and especially Republic commandos, just got on with the job. That was their sole purpose, and they were lucky. Their training sergeant had told them, outside in the ordinary world, every being from every species in the galaxy fretted about their purpose in life, searching for meaning. A clone didn't need to. Clones knew. They had been perfected for their role, and doubt need never trouble them. Darman had never known what doubt was until now. No amount of training had prepared him for this. He found a space against a bulkhead and sat down. A clone trooper settled down next to him, squeezing into the gap and briefly clunking a shoulder plate against his. They glanced at each other. Darman rarely had any contact with other clones. Commandos trained apart from everyone, including ARC troopers. The troopers' armor was white, lighter, less resistant. Commandos enjoyed upgraded protection, and Darman displayed no rank colors, but they both knew exactly who and what they were. Nice DC, the trooper said enviously. He was looking at the DC-17. Troopers were issued the heavier, lower spec rifle, the DC-15. Ion pulse blaster, RPG anti-armor, and sniper? Yeah. Every item of his gear was manufactured to a higher spec. A trooper's life was less valuable than a commando's. It was the way things were, and Darman had never questioned it. Not for long, anyway. Full house? Tidy. The trooper nodded approval. Job done? Eh? Yeah, Darman said quietly. Job done. The trooper didn't say anything else. Maybe he was wary of conversation with commandos. Darman knew what troopers thought about him and his kind. They don't train like us, and they don't fight like us. They don't even talk like us. A bunch of prima donnas. Darman didn't think he was arrogant. It was just that he could do every job a soldier could be called upon to do, and then some. Siege assault, counterinsurgency, hostage extraction, demolitions, assassination, surveillance, and every kind of infantry activity on any terrain and in any environment at any time. He knew he could because he had done it. He'd done it in training, first with simulation and then with live rounds. He'd done it with his squad, the three brothers with whom he had spent every moment of his conscious life. They'd competed against other squads, thousands just like them, but not like them, because they were squad brothers, and that was special. He had never been taught how to live apart from the squad, though now he would learn the hardest way of all. Darman had absolute confidence that he was one of the best special ops soldiers ever created. He was undistracted by everyday concerns of raising a family and making a living, things that his instructors said he was lucky never to know. But now he was alone. Very, very alone. It was very distracting indeed. He considered this for a long time in silence. Surviving when the rest of your squad had been killed was no cause for pride. He felt instead like something his training sergeant had described as shame. Hopefully that blocks the sound. Okay, where was I? Yes, there it was. That was what you felt when you lost a battle, apparently. But they had won. It was the first battle, their first battle, and they had won. The landing ramp of the Implacable eased down, and the bright sunlight of Ord Mantell streamed in. Darman replaced his helmet without thinking and stood in an orderly line, waiting to disembark and be reassigned. He was going to be chilled down, kept in suspended animation until duty called again. So that was the aftermath of victory. He wondered how much worse defeat might felt. Sorry, let me read that last line. So this was the aftermath of victory. He wondered how much worse defeat might feel. Quick coffee break. Okay. I'm Bronny Quillar, 40 light years from Ord Mantell, Tingalarm. The field of bark flowed from silver to ruby as the wind from the southwest bent the ripening. Let me start that over, my bad. The field of bark flowed from silver to ruby as the wind from the southwest bent the ripening grain in waves. It could have been a perfect late summer day. Instead, it was turning into one of the worst days Itan Turmukan's life. Itan had run and run, and she had nothing left in her. She flung herself flat between the furrows, not caring where she fell. Itan held her breath as something stinky and wet squelched under her. The pursuing Weequay couldn't hear her above the wind. She knew, but she held her breath anyway. Hey, girlie! His boots crunched closer. He was panting. Where you go? Don't be shy. Don't breathe. I got bottle of Uricol. You want to have party? He had a remarkably large vocabulary for a Weequay. All of it centered on his baser needs. I fun. When you get to know me. I should have waited for it to get dark. I could influence his mind, try to make him leave, but she hadn't, and she couldn't. Try as she might to concentrate, she was too full of adrenaline and uncontrolled panic. Come on, you scraggin', where are you? I find you. He sounded as if he was kicking his way through the crop and getting closer. If she got up and ran for it, she was dead. If she stayed where she was, he'd find her eventually. He wasn't going to get bored. He wasn't going to give up. Girlie! The Weequay's voice was close. To her right, about 20 meters away. She sipped a strangled breath and clamped her lips shut again, lungs aching, eyes streaming with the effort. Girlie! Closer. He was going to step right on her. Girlie! She knew what he'd do when he found her. If she was lucky, he'd kill her afterward. Gert! The Weequay was interrupted by a loud, wet thwack. He let out a grunt, and then there was a second thwack. Shorter, sharper, harder. Itan heard a squeal of pain. How many times have I got to tell you, Daikut? It was a different voice, human, with an hard edge of authority. Thwack! Don't waste my time. Another thwack. Another squeal. Itan kept her face pressed in the dirt. You get drunk one more time. You go chasing females one more time. I'm going to slit you from here to here. The Weequay shrieked. It was the sort of incoherent animal sound that beings made when pain overwhelmed them. Eten had heard too much of that sound in her short time on Quilar. Then there was silence. She hadn't heard the voice before, but she didn't need to. She knew exactly who it belonged to. Eten strained to listen, half expecting a heavy boot to suddenly stamp on her back. But all she could hear was the swish and the crunch of two pairs of feet wading through the crop away from her. She caught snatches of the fading conversation as the wind took it. The Weequay was still being berated. More important. What was? Later, but right now, Daikut, I need you to... Okay? Or I'll cut. Atan waited. Eventually, all she could hear was the breath of the wind, the rustling grain, and the occasional flutting call of a ground eel seeking a mate. She allowed herself to breathe normally again, but still she waited, face down in ripe manure, until dusk started to fall. She had to move now. The Gadans would be out hunting, combing the field in packs. On the top of that, the smell that hadn't bothered her while she was gripped by terror was starting to really bother her now. She eased herself up on her elbows, then her knees, and looked around. Why did they have to manure bark so late in the season anyway? She fumbled in the pockets of her cloak for a cloth. Now, if only she could find a stream she could clean herself up. She pulled a handful of stalks, crushed them into a ball, and tried to scrape off the worst of the dung and debris stuck to her. That's pretty expensive crop to be using for that, a voice said. Etienne gulped in a breath and spun around to find a local in a grubby schmuck scowling at her. He looked thin. Thanks a lot, Alexa. Okay, there we go. Let me start over where the guy spoke. That's a pretty expensive crop to be using for that, a voice said. Atan gulped in and breathed. Oh my god. Atan gulped in a breath and spun around to find a local, a grubby in a grubby smock, scowling at her. He looked thin, worn out, and annoyed. He was holding a threshing tool. Do you know how much that stuff's worth? I'm sorry, she said. Sliding her hand carefully inside her cloak, she felt for the familiar cylinder. She hadn't want the weak way to know she was a Jedi, but if this farmer was considering turning her in for a few loaves or a bottle of Urocol, she needed her lightsaber handy. It was your bark or my life, I'm afraid. The farmer stared at the crushed stalk and scattered bead-like grain. Tight-lipped, yes, bark fetched a huge price in the restaurants of Coruscant. It was a luxury, and the people who grew it for export couldn't afford it. They didn't seem to bother the Nemodians who controlled the trade. It never did. I'll pay for the damage, Athan said, her hand still inside the cloak. What were they after you for? The farmer asked, ignoring her offer. The usual, she said. Oh, ah. You're not that good looking. Charming. I know who you are. Oh no. Her grip closed. You do? I reckon. A little more food for his family, a few hours drunken oblivion, courtesy of your call. That was all she was to him. He made as if to step closer, and she drew her arm clear of her cloak because she was fed up with running and she didn't like the look of that threshing tool. Vum! Oh, great, the farmer sighed, eyeing the shaft of pure blue light. Not one of you lot. That's all we need. Yes, she said, and held the lightsaber steady in front of her face. Her stomach had knotted, but she kept her voice under control. I am Padawan Itan Turumuk. Let me try that again. I am Padawan Itan Turmukan. You can try to turn me in if you want to test my skill, but I prefer that you help me instead. Your call, sir. The farmer stared at the lightsaber as if he was trying to work out a price for it. Didn't help your master much, that thing, did it? Master Fuller was unfortunate and betrayed. She lowered the lightsaber and didn't. Excuse me. It didn't cut the beam. Are you going to help me? We're going to have Gehez Hokin's thugs all over us if I think they're busy, the tenant said. What do you want from us? Shelter for the moment. The farmer sucked his teeth thoroughly. Okay, come on, Padawan. Get used to calling me Natan, please. She thumbed off the lightsaber. The light died with a thump sound, and she slipped the hilt back inside her cloak, just to be on the safe side. Natan trailed after him, trying not to smell herself, but it was hard, nauseatingly hard. Even a scent hunting Guden and Guden wouldn't recognize her as human. It was getting dark now, and the farmer kept glancing over his shoulder at her. Oh, he shook his head, engaged in some internal conversation. I'm Bryhan, and this is my land. And I thought you lot were supposed to be able to use some sort of mind control tricks. How do you know I haven't? Atan lied. Oh, he said, and nothing more. She wasn't going to volunteer the obvious if he hadn't spotted it for himself. A disappointment to her master, she was clearly not the best of the bunch. She struggled with the force and she grappled with self-discipline. And she was here because she and Master Fuller happened to be nearby when the job needed doing. Fuller never could resist a challenge, and long odds, and it looked as if he'd paid the price. They hadn't found his body yet, but there had been no word from him either. Yes, Atan was a Padawan, technically. Speaking. That was weird. Let me try that again. Yes, Atan was a Padawan, technically speaking. She just happened to be one who was a breath away from building permadomes. Permadomes and refuge camps. Oh, permadomes. Gotcha. Like tents. She reasoned that part of a Jedi's skill was the simple use of psychology, and if Bryhan wanted to think the Force was strong in her, and that was and that there was a lot. Oh my goodness, I need some more coffee. Okay, where was it? Let me just start that paragraph over. Yes, Adan was a Padawan, technically speaking. She just happened to be one who was a breath away from building permadomes and refuge camps. She reasoned that part of a Jedi's skill was the simple use of psychology. And if Bryhan wanted to think the Force was strong in her, and that there was a lot more behind the external shell of gawky, plain girl covered in stinky dung, then that was fine by her. It would keep her alive as long. It would keep her alive a little longer while she worked out what to do next. Fleet support, Ord Mantell. Barrack Block 5, Epsilon. It was a waste. It was a waste. A rotten waste. RC-1309 busied himself maintaining his boots. He cleaned out the clumps, blowing out the red dust clear with a squirt of air from a pressure gun. He rinsed the liner and shook them dry. There was no point being idle while he was waiting to be chilled down. Sergeant? He looked up. The commando who had walked in placed his survival pack, armor, and black bodysuit on the bunk opposite and stared back. His readout panel identified him as RC-8015. I'm 5, he said, and held out his hand for shaking. So you lost your squad too? Niner, RC-1309 said, without taking the pre-offered hand. So, Nervad. My brother, you're the sole survivor? Yes. Did you hold back while your brothers pressed on, or were you just lucky? Vi stood there with his hand on his hips, identical to Niner, in every way except that he was different. He spoke a little differently. He smelled subtly differently. He smelled subtly different. He moved his hands, not like Niner's squad did. Not at all. I did my job, Vi said carefully. And I'd rather be with them than here. Vault. Niner considered him for a while and went back to cleaning his boots. Fi put his kit in the locker beside the bunk, then swung himself up into the top rack in one smooth motion. He folded his arms under his head very precisely and lay staring up at the bulkhead, as if he were meditating. If he had been Sev, Niner would have been. If he had been Sev, Niner would have known exactly what he was doing, even without looking, but Sev was gone. Clone troopers lost brothers in training. So did commandos, but troopers were socialized with whole sections, platoons, companies, and even regiments. And that meant that even after the inevitable deaths and removals during live exercises, there were still plenty of people around you whom you knew well. Commandos worked solely with each other. Niner had lost everyone he had grown up with, and so had Fi. He'd lost a brother before, 2-8, on exercise. The three survivors had welcomed the replacement, although they had always felt he was slightly different, a little distant, as if he had never quite believed he had been accepted. But they performed to accept. Oh, sorry. Let me reread that. Man, I'm like getting thirsty. Dry throat. Need water, I do. Where was I? Sorry about this. Here we go. But they performed to expected levels of excellence together. And as long as they did, their communion technicians and motley band of alien instructors didn't seem to care how they felt about it. But the commandos cared. They just kept it to themselves. It was a waste, Niner said. What was that? What was? Fi said. Deploying us in an operation like Geonosis. It was an infantry job, not special ops. That sounds like criticism of. I'm just making the point that we couldn't perform to maximum effectiveness. Understood. Maybe when we're received. My bad. Let me just start that whole conversation over. It was a waste, Niner said. What was? Vi said. Deploying us in an operation like Geonosis. It was an infantry job, not special ops. That sounds like criticism of. I'm just making the point that we couldn't perform to maximum effectiveness. Understood. Maybe when we're revived, we'll be able to do what we're really trained for. Niner wanted to say that he missed his squad, but that wasn't something to confide in a stranger. He inspected his boots and was satisfied, then stood up and spread his body suit flat on the mattress and checked it for vacuum integrity. With a sweep sensor in his glove. Oh, that was a weird sentence. I'm sorry about that. Whew. God, give me gas. It was a ritual so ingrained in him that he hardly thought about it. Maintain boots, suits, and armor plates. Recalibrate helmet systems. Check heads-up display. Strip down and reassemble DC-17. Empty and repack survival pack. Done. It took him 26 minutes and 20 seconds. stupid voice. Where was I? It took him 26 minutes and 20 seconds, give or take 2 seconds. Well-maintained gear was often the difference between life and death. So was 2 seconds. He closed the top of his pack with a clack and secured the seal. Then he checked the catches that held the separate ordnance pack to see that they were moving freely. That mattered when he needed to jettison explosive material fast. When he glanced up, Phi was propped on one elbow, looking down at him from the bunk. "Dry rations go on the 5th layer," he said. Niner always packed them further down, between his spare rappling line and his hygiene kit. "In your squad, maybe," he said, and carried on. Phi took the hint and rolled over on his back again, no doubt to meditate on how differently things might be done in the future. After a while, he started singing very quietly, almost under his breath. "Gonrik Tsad, Dornton, Torch, then Urzaden, da Werda Verda, Aden, Tartu." They were the wrath of a warrior's shadow and the gauntlet of the Republic. Niner knew that song. It was a traditional Mandalorian war chant, designed to boost the morale of the normal men who needed a bit of psyching up before a battle. The words had been altered a little to have meaning for the armies of the clone warriors. We don't need all that, Niner thought. We were born to fight, nothing else. But he found himself joining anyway. It was a comfort. He placed his gear in the locker, rolled on his bunk, and matched note and beat perfectly with Phi. 2 identical voices in the deserted barrack room. Niner would have traded every remaining moment of his life for a chance to rerun the previous day's engagement. He would have held Sev and Dee back. He would have sent 04 west and the E-Web cannon with the E-Web cannon. But he hadn't. Gratu kun hetsu darshilia. Our vengeance burns brighter still. Phi's voice trailed off into silence, the merest fraction of a section before Niner's. He heard him swallow hard. "I was up there with them, Sarge," he said quietly. "I didn't hang back, not at all." Niner closed his eyes. He regretted hinting that Phi might have done anything less. "I know, brother," he said. "I know." And that concludes Chapter 1 and the prologue of Star Wars Republic Commandos Hard Contact.